Malevolent is unlike anything I've ever seen before. A show made by one man every week, averaging about 10 minutes of fully produced content with an element of surprise for even himself. There are patrons who vote on what happens next, and he has to prepare for all outcomes. My name is Queen. This is a podcast all about Malevolent, where once a week, every week, I'll talk about that element of surprise with other fans, all participating in the coolest storytelling podcast of our time. Welcome to Malevolent Autopsy. This week, no vote was posed to the listeners, as the final portion of the part is traditionally left to tie up loose ends. But we're never short on things to talk about, so let's go see what other patrons had to say in our weekly live chat. So, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. This is a no vote week, which is traditionally always really hard for me because I love being in poll chat, and there was no reason to be in poll chat this week, so that's tough shit on my end. So this is the end of part 49, which means next week starts part 50, which is absolutely wild. Because it's the number 50, I wonder if it's going to be some kind of particularly poignant or exciting episode. I don't know. We'll see. Mizra says, I love the no poll weeks, nice and chill besides the potential dread for what comes next. Yeah, lots of people tend to say that they're really relieved that there's nothing happening at least 1 week out of the month because things feel chaotic and high pressure and tense when there's really complicated votes all the time. User I am evaporating says, I think it's the start of the quest, so that's good. Yeah, some people have been speculating that it's going to be all new characters. Some people have been speculating that it will be characters familiar from Call of Cthulhu games related to Malevolent. Some people have also speculated that it might be something more attached to like characters that we've seen but have not had a voice necessarily, like Aaliyah or that dude with the stitched mouth. Fish says, I'm thinking it might be Everard, Aaliyah, and Stitch Mouth Man, maybe. Yeah. So a lot of people are very excited about new character designs, meeting new voices. Ink says maybe Charlie is one of them. And look, I'm not going to lie and tell you I don't have a sliver of hope that it might be Charlie. But maybe like not our Charlie, but like a different iteration of Charlie or someone Charlie adjacent. At this point, I'd even take somebody who knew Charlie once. Knew a version of Charlie once even. I'm not picky. Anybody. Charlie, my knight in shining armor, come and rescue Arthur, please. Thank you. Arthur and John, I guess. KM says, I'm looking forward to Arthur deciding that he needs to betray Cain. Yeah, that's going to be very, very cool, I think. The fact that we know what's at stake for Arthur and we know how serious that threat is, and the fact that Arthur and the audience are not under any delusion that Cain is going to keep his word if we deliver the Blackstone. But at the same time, I think we're all holding out hope that if he does get what he wants, at least he won't do the bad thing. Jilly the kid says, the Lester boys are at it again, fighting gods beyond their comprehension. Yeah, and Fish and Seer of Time have both mentioned Lilith and hopefully getting to meet her or see her or be more involved with her. KM says, it's going to be a really defining moment for Arthur's character. All these people trust him to do what's right, and I think he really has it in him to do that. Yeah, I have faith in Arthur to do what's right. As much as Arthur struggles a lot with the moral grayness of life and how to not carry all of that with you so much that it halts your progress forward, I do think he will do the right thing in the end, whatever the right thing is. And I don't think it will be very clear. I have a feeling it's gonna be a far more complicated answer. KM says, oh, I am positive he's stealing the stone. I just think a finale where he says, actually, Cain, fuck you, enter the Dark World arc. Yeah, that would be neat. Ball Control says, I thought there was a really interesting comment in the chapter channel about how we're playing the villain if Arthur intends to try and sneak away with the Blackstone. And yes, Fall Control, as always, has been my lovely little helper and did a lot of legwork on this chapter for me as far as getting me prepped and helping me out. So thank you again, as always, to Fall Control. He noted down some lovely chapter comments. Yeah, it was Jala Marie Nolan Joyer 3000 is the nickname on the Discord, said, yeah, oh my god, I'm actually so happy about this. Arthur is the villain. He's the one who's going to steal the Blackstone and compromise them. He's the one doing Kane's bidding. He's the villain. Can anyone hear me? We're playing the villain. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and then Kara mentioned when BJ has a soundtrack, always gets me emotional in some way. Yeah, I first commented in the chapter. I think the first comment that I dropped when the chapter released was that BJ Boothjohn having backing track music always makes me feel something, whether it's like a sense of dread or excitement or getting particularly emotional, because I always do. So I'm going to go ahead and read this lovely and hilarious chapter summary the Volcontrol wrote before we get too far into the weeds without me having read it. We just kind of jumped into conversation. Arthur burns all 6 bullets and successfully kills the Dark Young. Aaliyah tosses down Barney Boy with his throat slit, and Everard appears with a sword drawn. John comes in clutch, suggesting Arthur show Everard the coin, and the time loop is complete. The soldiers gave Arthur the coin to prove to Everard that Arthur is not, in fact, one of the cultists. Everard lured to his personal hunting ground to exterminate, but one worthy of his quest to relocate the Blackstone. Everard reveals that Aaliyah can heal Arthur of his sickness, though it will be a lengthy process, in exchange for Arthur accepting his quest. The stakes are high, as Aaliyah has the gift of seeing the truth in the hearts of men, and Arthur and John have many secrets, but Arthur accepts. That was a great summary. Really appreciate it, Volcontrol. Some notable quotes from the chapter. I never doubted you. Not without you. All that is necessary for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing was like one of my favorite things about the nightmare. And it came back in this chapter, which I loved. Loved it. Everard remarks on Arthur's talents with defeating the Dark Young proves him capable and useful. Girl, he had a gun. Does Everard think Arthur can cast magic missile? Volcontrol. Thank you. That was wonderful. It was very good. Oh, okay. And I think one of the most significant parts of the chapter was, believe me, that I want to protect humanity in all its forms. And John just going, huh. That was really sweet. Arthur expressing his acceptance of John no matter what or who he decides that he is, and then John being, I think, touched by that realization that, oh, that's me. Ugh, it's very sweet. Oh yeah, and by the way, the contents of the bag being everywhere. Yes, Roses of Envy, the inventory is in shambles. Honorable mention to Peppers, who said, okay, I forgot this was a non-voting week, and I was like, deadass, why would we not choose to guide the Blackstone, because I thought we'd have to argue for it. And a lot of people, especially Foxalis Horvidox in the Discord, had said, my son, he has fallen out of the bag and cannot get up. I miss Yorick and Noel. I really miss Yorick, though. It's been so long since I've heard him. Yeah, Yorick is dearly beloved and missed, but as some people pointed out in the chapter channel when the chapter dropped, it's probably unlikely that we'll get to hear Yorick a lot in the coming chapters, just because we're going to be around other people. But who knows how weird they are. Maybe they will like the talking head skull. Maybe they're like normal about it. And a lot of people were talking very excitedly about the horse agenda. Seer of Time says, my horse agenda, give Arthur a horse. I am very excited to hear potential clip-clopping sounds of horses. I think that would be some fun soundscaping, but also kind of annoying. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe they will magically float. Maybe they're like floating ghost horses or something. Oh, okay. And then the last thing I want to talk about before we move on, because we do have a special guest segment this week, the thing I latched onto during the chapter, and I will say that I'm not confident that I'm correct. I don't, in fact, even think this is a theory. I just don't usually have a lot to contribute in the way of ideas and symbolism and malevolent, because I'm not very good at picking up on that stuff. But the fact that Arthur could very well symbolize pestilence, the 4th horseman of the apocalypse. There's a lot of symbolism already present that mentions that maybe we might be doing a 4 horseman thing. We're going to be the 4th person who is going to be guiding the Blackstone, and the whole Dies Irae thing. And yeah, We'll see. I don't think it holds a whole lot of water, but I do think it's cool. In the same way I thought it was cool that we had somebody with a sewn shut mouth and covered eyes to represent maybe speak no evil and see no evil, but we never got hear no evil. So, I mean, it's not too late, right? I mean, we could end up that could be our third party member if it really is Aaliyah and the guard that is going to be our companions. Maybe the third party member is that hear no evil component, and Arthur will be the only one who's capable of like communicating because Aaliyah doesn't talk and the guard has his mouth stitched shut and the third person can't hear. So technically that would mean that Harlan doesn't have to do any new voices. And just has to do a lot of soundscaping. That would be funny. There are some people who are talking about it maybe is Jan and Petra, who are also Call of Cthulhu characters from the games that are somewhat connected to Malevolent. So there's lots of different theories about who these people are going to be, and I'm very excited to see who. But for now, I think since this is a no vote week and we don't have a vote to talk about, I think it would be really cool to dive into something interesting about Malevolent that everybody is interested in, which is particularly the music. And I know that it is so impressive to most people that Harlan voices all of the characters in Malevolent, but he makes all the music of Malevolent too, which is wild. So I would love to introduce Roses of Envy, Rose, to come and talk about some music of Malevolent with me. Rose, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you what are your credentials?
Hi, I have been a musician for many years, so I've been playing violin specifically for about 15 years, and then I've picked up other string instruments along the way. I went to school for music, so I have quite a bit of experience in the music realm, but I will say I'm much more experienced with strings. So the fact that I've latched onto so much of the piano music here is crazy to me because piano is not something I have a whole lot of experience with. I've basically only played for like 2 semesters.
I get you. No worries. I think that, I mean, to me, you're an expert because I don't know anything about music. I don't play instruments. I don't read music. I am very novice. So I'm really excited to learn more about what you've picked up on in Malevolent and diving in here with like a super fun one that I think everyone's going to enjoy. Oh, actually, you know what? Before I do all of this, do you want to introduce yourself with your preferred name and pronouns?
Oh, I am Roses of Envy. You can just call me Rose, and she, her.
Great. Thank you so much.
I always forget that. Oh, I can talk about why they make you play recorder in 5th grade. It is to help with coordination. So literacy, reading music, and also lining up your left and right hand whenever you're playing like music. Music has a purpose, I promise.
I love that. I love that. Okay, well, what do you think about the silly tune in Malevolent? So the silly tune, if anyone hasn't read the transcripts, is what they call that like kind of playful note that happens whenever we get something funny in Malevolent. Like in particular, I'm thinking of my favorite scene in Malevolent, which is the elevator scene where John and Arthur talk about getting into a fight.
So in the transcript, it usually shows up as the whimsical tune. And I have been working on a Charlie Dowd thing, and it happens whenever they're talking to Larson and Yellow, and, you know, Charlie interrupts and is like, hey, I got something to say. And this tune is actually, it's a pizzicato cello. So whenever you're playing a string instrument, you can either play it arco, which is with the bow, or you can play it pizzicato, which is when you're plucking the strings. And whenever you have pizzicato, it's usually more of like an intrigue. It's like, ooh, something's happening, because it's more underlying compared to like if they were playing it with the bow, it'd be a lot louder. So the notes in this whimsical tune are an E, which in the octave it'd be an E2, up to a B flat. And this is actually, that's the first one, so like dun, dun, and it's actually a tritone. So if you know anything about intervals, back in the olden days, this was actually called the chord of the devil because it clashes, it sounds kind of crunchy. And if you're talking the technicality, it's called dissonance. So if you've ever heard Dance Macabre by Saint-Saëns, it's the opening violin solo, the which I cannot sing that because it's multiple notes at the same time. But if you know West Side Story, the song Maria actually features a tritone in the very beginning. So starting with this like kind of crunchy chord, it's like, oh, where is this going? And then the next three notes are F sharp, D sharp, E. And it's kind of like a little turn. So like dun, 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 dun. So it just keeps like leading into itself, which is like this exact, just, it's whimsical. It's such a good, like perfect description. It's a whimsical tune.
I love it. That's so cool. I love that. And I also think that it's so rarely sprinkled into Malevolent that you really notice it when it comes up because it's just nothing like the other music, but it still doesn't stand out so much that I'm like, oh, that didn't come from Malevolent. You know what I mean?
Yes, and it's also one of the few that's in a major key, which I will talk about further because I wrote a whole thing about that as well. But it is just very, it's like, oh, this is not serious. We can relax for a moment.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, now I have a question here that I really like, which is just kind of a broad question. What do you think about the importance of having emotional cues signaled by certain tracks is?
To me, having emotional cues is just as important as having descriptions in a script. So if you walked in and was just trying to read something and it didn't tell you how you were reading it, you weren't given any direction, you can assume how the phrase is supposed to come across, but ultimately you don't know unless the author gives you some sort of clue around it. So I always think of that image of the sentence with the different words italicized, because a different word italicized gives it a different meaning. And like we're talking with the whimsical tune, for example, in the order, when they're having the discussion with Larson, and it shifts to Noel saying, I haven't had a chance to speak, it could be an ominous thing. If we had been given one of those more ominous soundtracks that he uses in the series, it would be, oh gosh, like this is serious. But instead we get the whimsical tune, which means, oh hey, this is lighthearted. And then our themes change whenever the conversation changes. So it's giving you that specific, you can relax now. Oh, hey, something serious is about to happen. Okay, we can go back to relaxing.
Yeah, I love that. It's fantastic. And I also think that there's so much emotional weight to the music of Malevolent for such a significant reason. I mean, Arthur is a composer, a performer, and you feel the weight of music in the story that he has to tell about Thoreau and everything to do with his past. So that kind of leads into what the second question is, which is what is the emotional language of the soundtrack of Malevolent and why is that cool and how is it effective?
So overall, there's a sense of solitude to the soundtrack of Malevolent. From if you look at the Bandcamp and you listen to the pieces that he's composed for it, and it's super noticeable in the early seasons. So if you listen to a movie or even some other podcast, you'll hear soundtracks with these huge orchestrations like John Williams or Hans Zimmer, and you can barely keep track of all the instruments in there. But with Malevolent, there's usually just one or two easily identified. And with action scenes, with the different soundtracks, you can hear how it stacks and how it gives it that different effect. But overall, piano is a solitary instrument, so you can go without accompaniment if you're a piano player. You can be in an ensemble, it can feature in concertos, and it has a place wherever it needs to be. But you don't necessarily need anyone else if you're a piano player. So most of the time with it just being piano, it's really isolated, which I think goes back to Arthur as a character, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, and Seer of Time brings up something interesting too, which is in Malevolent music as a whole, I also always associate cello as John and piano as Arthur because there are two versions of the Malevolent theme, which is, one with that's just piano and then one with the cello, I believe.
Yes, and How Far We've Come, that one especially, like it shows up in, which I've done a deep dive on that and I would totally go on a tangent, but in the beginning when it's just Arthur and then the piano actually grows into itself and then when it gets to the part with the cello, it just completely fills out. It's like all of a sudden everything slots together, and then when the cello leaves, because the cello's only there for a couple of bars, it still goes back to that solitariness, but instead of feeling like there's something missing, it's like concluded. You know that it's done what it needs to do. And I believe the other version of Thoreau's song, it's the same thing. It feels like there's something completed about it.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I've felt that when the cello comes in and then leaves again, you would assume that you would feel like it's emptier, but it doesn't. It doesn't. I don't know how that. It's so cool that the way that works. But that also brings me to this third question, which is, can you speak on the note/melody profile of any of the character themes? Like maybe, I don't know, Noel's theme?
I'll start with the other ones first, which I kind of wrote a whole thing. There's a lot of similarities overall, which, again, piano as its own solitary instrument and can operate on its own, you usually hear similarities anyway. I have a hard time picking out piano chords, actually, when I'm transcribing. So whenever I'm listening to these pieces, sometimes they merge together. So we actually have 4 Thoreau dedicated songs. We have Thoreau's song, which is the primary theme of Malevolent. There's a lot of repetition with the left hand and these changing chords written in triplets, and people have transcribed this one already, so I haven't done that yet. I plan to do an analysis eventually, but I'm starting with the ones first that, Bittersweet City, Noel's theme, all that. And then we have Thoreau's Waltz, which, as a waltz, when I was listening to it, again, I need to do an analysis, but I feel like it's either in 6/8 or a very fast 3, which is interesting because most of these pieces are slower. There's not really a fast tempo in a lot of these. So as this being Thoreau's Waltz, interesting, noting that. In Thoreau's Lullaby, the right-hand melody was really hesitant, and I noticed that the descending chords led itself somewhere, and I have more notes on this, which I'll get back to. And then we have Thoreau's Goodbye, which is different than the previous 3 songs we've heard, but they do still have these similarities. All of Thoreau's songs are in a minor key, which, especially for the lullaby, is interesting. Most lullabies are not in a minor key. If you think of Frere Jacques or like Rockabye Baby, all of them are major. Yes, so minor key equals tragic key, Volt Control says, which is true. Most of the time when you hear something in a minor key, it's not happy. And there are a couple composers who have played around with this, and the one I think of first is Mahler. In Mahler's First Symphony, I think it's the 3rd movement, he actually writes Frere Jacques in a minor key, and he gives the solo to the double bass. And it's such an interesting, it like turns it on its head because you're expecting this, happy lullaby, and then you get the double bass playing it in a minor key, and it's one double bass. It's a solo, so it's one of the lowest instruments in the orchestra. And that's what it reminded me of, knowing that these songs are all in a minor key. And yeah, Autumn says minor key because Arthur's memory of Thoreau are inherently mired in tragedy, which, yes, I think whenever he was composing these, if you think of composers, many of them, when they're writing their pieces, you can find a point where their pieces get sad. You can think of Tchaikovsky or Mendelssohn, because something happens in their life and they compose based on, what they're feeling at the time. And those pieces, you can hear it reflected, and we definitely hear it with all of these Thoreau pieces.
I think it's interesting that, like Volt Control said, minor key equals tragic key, but it's so much deeper than that. Like, I mean, I love that it's used in the classical way here, but for some reason, and maybe you would have any insight to this, for some reason, it doesn't just feel tragic, it feels like, I don't know, thoughtful or wistful, which actually reminds me of another adjective people have used to describe Noel's theme and Bittersweet City.
Melancholy, right? Bittersweet.
Yeah.
I agree. Honestly, so those 4 I put at the top of my list because they were all Thoreau based. And then we have the rest of the pieces because I went through and I basically just listened to each of them and wrote down a couple of thoughts. This Too Shall Pass, Fatherhood, Lost, those 3 are also in a minor key. And all of those kind of make sense. So, This Too Shall Pass happens a lot in season 4. I always think of the rainy episodes, when they're outside of the farm. The right-hand melody is a higher octave over top, and then we have broken chords with a very low left hand, so it's like this kind of echo that is pretty sad and devastating. And then Fatherhood, again, season 4, which I think of both Daniel and Arthur with this piece. We have a very unsure right-hand melody with a much more solid left-hand chord, but it sounds somber, just the entire piece of it.
Now, Rose, for the layman, when you say right hand and left hand.
Yes. So when you're playing piano, typically your right hand is doing the treble clef notes, which are the melody in most cases, and it is a higher pitch. And then your left hand is doing the bass clef notes, which is the lower pitch.
Got it.
And then you can meet in the middle. So typically, if you hear something higher pitched and it's a melody line, it's in the right hand. If you hear something lower pitched, it's in the left hand.
Which it would explain why people are always referring to higher and lower songs as, John versus Arthur.
Yeah, because like most of the time, like the cello is a bass clef instrument. It can go into higher clefs, but most of the time it's written in bass clef. It's a lower instrument. And then piano, in most of the soundtracks, actually, it's written at a higher pitch. So honestly, like it is very much so Arthur versus John.
Yeah, that's very
Or
cool.
not
I
versus,
love,
with.
yeah, not verses, but like, opposed to. But like, I think that's interesting. Yeah, Kara mentioned, I hadn't thought of that before. Yeah, I've noticed that there are some people who will talk about the hands in relation to piano and what parts of music might be more speaking to Arthur or John. And I've never really understood until you explain that right hand, left hand thing. But yeah, okay, I get it now. Like, because one side's higher and lower. I get it.
So Julie the Kid says, I wonder if the minor key decision was chosen as a way for Arthur to play in mind for Bella with her passing, and that it would be a connection for Thoreau to have with the lullaby. But I don't know if he felt that way that much to consider this. So I guess it kind of depends on when we think he wrote his pieces, but it's possible that Arthur just is a composer who writes in a minor key. There are composers who stick to specific keys. There are a few exceptions, but it's possible that that's just how he felt at the time. Like if we also think about his relationship to Bella before Fro was had, which is, up for speculation other than the fact that he felt it was wrong. I think it could definitely have something to do with it though.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting to consider why he might have written the pieces the way that he did, and I like that it's kind of open to our interpretation because I think it leaves room for a lot of really beautiful concepts. Like personally, I think it would be super cute and super lovely if, some of these pieces maybe Arthur had in mind for Thoreau to be able to pick up and play with him. Maybe these were composed in such a way that they would be easier for her to follow, or I don't know.
Yes, so in Coda, which Graham mentions, I believe the lullaby and Fro's song were written before Fro's death, whichever ones we see him teaching her in Coda, and then the one in her music box. So in Coda, we actually hear him teaching Fro the lullaby, which I loved that scene as a musician. Like I immediately locked onto it because it's how you teach. So he plays it for her, and then she echoes in a different octave, and then he plays it again and she echoes again, and that's exactly how you teach an instrument, especially at younger ages, because you repeat. Repetition is so important in music. Muscle memory can only be developed the more you do it, and especially with an instrument, the more you do it, the easier it is. The more you repeat it, the more you know. So I absolutely loved that thought, and I think about that often, him teaching her how to play.
Yeah. So, what other character themes have you been able to pick apart?
So, I'll get to the last three on the list. So, we have Bittersweet City. These are the three that are in a major key, actually. The only three. We have Bittersweet City, Peggy Gordon, and then How Far We've Come. So, oh, and of course, Noel's theme. How could I forget? Ugh. I wrote it a little too small. I know, how dare I? Ugh. So, How Far We've Come, I've gone super in depth with my analysis, and I might circle back to it a little bit, but Bittersweet City and Noel's theme are both major, and then Peggy Gordon is major, which Peggy Gordon is a cover of another song. So I did notice in the piano version that Harlan recorded, the higher octave right-hand melody, which just means the higher pitched notes. Oh, yes, Lost. Sorry, Graham. I knew I was forgetting one of them. Lost is also in a minor key. So there's minimal left-hand chords in Peggy Gordon, and when they do appear, whenever we do have left-hand chords, they're really centered in the middle. It's not a bunch of low notes. So I found that to be quite interesting if you're associating higher pitch notes with Arthur, because, since this is Butcher's song, having that, if you think about, connecting those dots, these thoughts are hard to get out, but...
No, I get you.
And then we have Bittersweet City and Noel's theme, which I have been actively working on for analysis, but they're both very interconnected. So Bittersweet City appears first in season 4, and it's up until we meet Noel. So whenever we're in New York, if you hear a theme before you meet Noel, it is Bittersweet City. And once we meet Noel, and I haven't finished, so I've been listening through the Patreon chapters. I haven't finished season 4 yet on Patreon. I'm getting there, but from what I've gotten to, any other instance of it, it is Noel's theme. Sometimes it changes octaves, sometimes it's not a full rendition of it, but it's always Noel's theme. Bittersweet City has not appeared yet, from what I can tell, which I could be wrong, but from what I've heard so far. So in the first Noel appearance, which is in part 35, it does appear like twice, and then after that, it's just Noel's theme. I'm looking at my notes. And these two pieces are very interconnected. They're both in the same key, which is B major from what I've heard so far. And a lot of the themes are the same. There are a couple of differences, which this is very music theory heavy. Bittersweet City, from what I can tell, is written in 4/4, which means there's 4 beats in a measure and the quarter notes what get the beat. And Noel's theme, I am pretty sure, is written in 3/4. Now, sometimes it's hard for me to tell, especially time signatures, because when Harlan's composing, he uses a lot of rubato and he uses a lot of stretching of the notes. So rubato is literally the composer takes, or the performer can take however long they want to play. So if they decide to hold a half note, which is supposed to be 2 beats, for 5 beats, 6 beats, they can do that. It's up to the performer to interpret. But that makes it hard if you're trying to write out the music by ear, because I have no idea what the rhythm is.
Right.
It is different from a fermata. So a fermata means you hold the note until the conductor cuts you off, which if you are the solo performer, then you can cut it off whenever. But rubato, you are still moving. And this is where it gets kind of, there's 12 different symbols for the same thing. It could be a caesura, it could be a rallentando, it could be many different things. But from what I can tell as a soloist piece, I would say it's probably rubato.
Wow, that is fascinating. I didn't even realize that there were going to be like flexible notes that way, I guess. I've never thought of that, but yeah, that reminds me of stage performers and their ability to improvise or not, and what is flexible and what isn't, because I know there are certain sections in especially musical theater where people are like, okay, this is the exact choreography for this dance, but there's a musical break here where the chorus is allowed to improvise, or no, everything needs to be exactly this way, laid out in this format. And that kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about music and art in general. You can have your own interpretation of things. So even though a solo's been played a million times, and yes, there's a specific way you should play Mozart, you can have your own interpretation of things. And I like what Graham said. Harlan is always doing things his own way, and that extends to the music, and that's honestly kind of iconic of him, which is true. I mean, if you listen to the pieces, there are similarities, just as there is with most art, but there's so many, just when I listen to it, I'm like, wow, he really used rubato here. He utilized a different chord structure here. All these things that you're allowed to do as an artist.
Yeah, it's very much, it gives the vibe of Harlan has a signature, and he's applying that to all of his music. Do you know why? I mean, have you examined any of the reasons why, like, for example, people talk a lot about how the pauses in music often, especially in Noel's theme or Bittersweet City, often feel like contemplative, or some people will say they feel particularly longing, and people have different interpretations in general of those breaks in music, or the way the note is held out, and they're all slightly different, but they all get the same general vibe.
Yeah, I mean, silence is just as necessary as sound in music, and I feel like it's the same when you're talking. Like, if you just said everything in one big run-on sentence, it would be difficult to understand. And there are patterns in things, so silence can be a pattern, and if you listen to the music, there are patterns to the pauses, and it could be whatever your interpretation is. So what I think is totally different probably than what other people think, and that's fine, because we're allowed to interpret things however we want. But silence is music in itself, and I say that a lot because it is important to have silence in music is called rests. So you have your notes and then you have your rests. So there are specific values to some of them. But for example, you can put a fermata over a rest, which means you hold that silence until the conductor says you're done. So when I'm listening to like an audio medium and I notice there's a shift from silence into background noise, whether it's the Foley or soundtracks, or if we're listening to a scene. So for example, I love this scene because I've been listening to it a lot, but when we get the whimsical tune with Noel and the Larson conversation, the whimsical tune pauses. And then they say a couple lines, and then the whimsical tune comes back in, and then it pauses. And it does that until it gets to a new section, and then a new soundtrack comes in. So it goes back to the emotion of the pieces. If there is a silence, it's meaningful. There's a purpose for it. Even like in the midst of an action scene where it's like, hey, you're hiding now, and you're silent. Or, we get a big drop of information, and then it goes into the next bit of, okay, now we have to talk about it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Zero Time says silence is so important. The same goes for acting, not just music. Harlan said in his commentaries that he regretted not extending certain scenes and allowing them to breathe. Specifically, when Arthur tells John about Thoreau, yeah, in the commentaries, he's also mentioned wishing that he had replaced certain musical cues. He's like, oh, that one's too sad, or oh, that one's too happy, or whatever. And he isn't sure if he'll go back and change it, but he knows that it was probably just like, this is what I had available. And, that he wanted to work with his own stuff. And I mean, full respect, he puts out a chapter a week, right? I don't know that I would be able to just like create brand new material every week for not only the script, but also the music side of it to fit every scenario that comes up on the fly.
Yeah, I know. I've been analyzing these and it takes time. So for me, I had transcribed the music by ear, and then I go back and I use my theory brain, which does not get a whole lot of use. And I have to figure out, well, what key is it? What chords are here? Are these actual chords? Or are they chords that don't exist?
Right.
So like composing music is not something I do a whole lot of. I do a lot of transcribing, but thinking of just composing pieces along with doing all the other things he does for the episodes is very crazy.
Yeah. He does so much work on all of these. I have the Bandcamp up right now if we wanted to listen to any of the tracks that he has up there briefly together, and maybe you can say something poignant that you would need the music to help you refresh the audience's memory. If it's up to you. I just wanted to let you know I have that tool.
I feel like I've talked so much and said nothing at all.
Oh my God, no, you've had such great insight to all of this stuff. I really appreciate it. I know that you had also mentioned, like, I know that you have the particular tracks that you've analyzed and you're most confident in, but I also know that there are so many tracks in Malevolent that it's hard to nail down something about all of them. However, I did notice that on the soundtrack, we have like quite a specific collective of, like, you have all of the Thoreau songs, and then you have This Too Shall Pass. I don't know if you've done any listening to that one.
I have. I just haven't analyzed it since it's one of the slower ones,
Yeah.
and honestly, it's kind of sad. So
It's very sad.
like, ooh, I want to do Noel's theme and Bittersweet City first. So I can definitely probably add a couple more things about those two, since I've done a partial analysis, so I haven't finished it yet, but I've definitely gotten started. Also, you guys are so sweet.
Yeah, everyone in the chat is letting Rose know how wonderful and cool and amazing Rose is.
I appreciate all of you.
We love it. And I definitely want to have you come back and keep talking to us about music, because I've enjoyed learning a lot about it. And, it's so much fun. And also any excuse to talk about Noel, I'll take.
Of course. I know one thing that I haven't gotten to yet, but talking about Dies Irae.
Oh, yes.
That's going to take a little more research because that is opera, and opera is very intensive. But I would love at some point to get something together on that.
Oh, yeah. I would love to have you come on and talk about that probably closer to when it comes up, because I'm sure it's gonna.
Oh, yes, for sure.
How did you like the chapter this week?
Oh, I loved the chapter this week. It was one of those, every time I heard a theme, I pointed and said, hey, I know that.
I know that
Very
one.
exciting. And all the soundscaping, I've loved the soundscaping for the forest and the dark young and all of that. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's incredible how he can still make it so immersive, and like footsteps and echoes and all of this stuff, but then music comes in and it doesn't take me out of it. Like somehow the music doesn't make me remember that it's not really happening. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Oh yes, good soundtracks add to, they don't subtract.
Yeah.
So if you hear something, it should always be beneficial instead of just, oh, now there's sound in the background.
Yeah, and I think that, have you listened to the commentaries yet?
I am up to part 9.
Okay. I think he's already
working my way
mentioned
through them
it.
slowly but surely.
They're really good, but they take a while. I think he's mentioned it already then for you, but he talks about how sometimes he was a little bit heavy on some of like the horror sting sound effects and like the really loud blood pumping music that you hear when he's ramping up to do big action sequences or like a monster chasing stuff. And I mean, even though I had never thought about it and it never took me out of anything, in fact, it made me more excited about the scene. Going back and listening to that alongside of him, you can really tell how he's pulled back on his use of music and when he's using it and how, like, his evolution of when he drops audio cues has changed, and I think it's gotten so much better over time. What do you think?
Oh, yes, it's very intentional. Whenever you hear something, it's definitely, and even in the earlier seasons, I always think like it's a learning process. So, of course, as the seasons progress, you hear different things and things change. But every single time the music appears, to me anyway, it's always intentional and you know it's there for a reason. So I always think it fits well. But I can also understand going back from, say, this season and then listening to season one and going, maybe it didn't need to be so loud there.
Yeah, I think especially the artist is always their biggest critic, right? I mean,
Oh, yes.
anything I wrote even a year ago, I'm going to be like, oh, no, I didn't need to do that. That didn't need to be that long. Yeah.
I totally, very much so understand. I think that's the struggle of being an artist.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else that you think would be super interesting or fun to talk about?
We can always talk about Noel, of course.
Of course we can. So why is Noel your favorite character?
So my favorite character is actually Parker, but Noel is my favorite speaking character.
There you go.
So
Your favorite living speaking character.
If we ever get Parker content, just know I will be losing my mind.
That's okay.
Like,
I forgive you.
Just know. But I was very much so the second he appeared, I was not one of the ones who doubted. I was like, oh, this man, this is the one. And it's his mannerisms, how he's able to just like roll with whatever and compartmentalize all the things that he had to go through and still keep going.
Yeah.
What a man.
I know. Oh, well, yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things too, is how roll with the punches he is. He's very like anything that comes up, he's like, okay, and how am I going to work with that? Rather than, having a breakdown about it immediately. That can come later, I'm sure. But
Yes.
but he's such an action-oriented man who has both feet on the ground, and I really like that about Noel. I also when we were talking about Noel's theme in the chat quite a while ago, I don't know if you were around for that. I almost started typing up this big long thing about like what I heard from it, what it makes me feel and think about. But like ultimately, it sounds so thoughtful in a way that makes me think of Noel, because even when we first meet him and he first talks to Arthur, first of all, it's a very tense and like standoff kind of scene where Arthur thinks he might be in trouble and Noel doesn't know who the fuck he's looking at right now. And they're both trying to...
Or his 7 murders.
Yeah. Oh my God. And they're both trying to figure out like the tone of things. And even when he's speaking in that first introductory scene, he's so smooth and calm and level-headed, and he just takes one thing at a time, and he's like, I'm really confident that I've got this under control. And even when he realizes he doesn't have it under control and things are kind of out of his scope, he's willing to listen to Arthur and take him seriously and understand that he's working with somebody who, at the very least, has good intentions and is here with more knowledge than he has about the situation. And that I just deeply respect.
Absolutely. He's such a respectable man. And Hydra says, and Noel is so supportive too. He's such a people person. The way he talks to the cops in the hospital, when he gets impressed by Arthur John using the ring on the elevator, he's so sweet. And I agree. He is a very sweet man.
He is. And like, who can say their heart did not melt at least a little bit when he says, I was talking to John at the diner.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And also, whenever Arthur, is debating with himself, and then he goes, I have a voice inside my head. And Noel's just like, all right.
Got it.
Cool.
Accepted. No questions. Onward.
Yep, tell me about the voice. Just go ahead and talk about it.
He's seen and done weirder.
So it is in progress. I'm working on a compilation of every Noel voice line. I actually would have had it done 2 days ago, but then the app crashed and I had to completely restart.
Yeah, last night I was in the Malevolent Patreon chat and I was like, that's it. I can't take it anymore. I'm just going to do a complete Noel compilation of just his lines. And Rose DM'd me like, wait, no, I'm already doing it. I'm almost done. Don't do anything.
I'm hoping it will be done tomorrow. It would have been tonight, but autopsy.
Yes, autopsy. And thank you so much for taking your time to come and hang out and chat. I really appreciated it. And
absolutely,
genuinely, it was such a blast. I loved learning and I love hearing you talk about things, so never stop.
I was very excited to talk about music for 40 minutes-ish. I will definitely do it again. Bye.
Thank you again so much, Rose, for hopping on and speaking with us about the music of Malevolent. That was fascinating and wonderful. And I also loved getting to talk about Noel again, because there will be one day where I just do a whole episode. It's just nothing but Noel. Okay, well, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody's involvement and participation. It means the world to me. I wouldn't do it if you guys didn't show up. So thank you. You guys make Autopsy as wonderful as it is. Thank you, of course, to Harlan Guthrie, the sole creator of Malevolent. You can find everything official at linktree/Harlan Guthrie. Without his labor of love for a story he wants to tell, we wouldn't be here. And speaking of here, if you want to be part of the live vote chat I record each week, join the Invictus Patreon and connect your Discord account. We have our own private patrons-only autopsy channel. If you want to chat with me and maybe even some other folks you hear from on the show, you can also find a public autopsy channel from the Invictus Discord, so you can hang out even if you're not a patron. While Malevolent Autopsy is my pride and joy, it wouldn't be ever improving without some key players. Thank you to Mizra, Nikki, and Vol Control for their work editing and assisting with production. They do so much for the show, and they do it all as volunteers, and I couldn't be more grateful. To submit a voice recording, have your message read aloud on the show, or find us on other platforms, visit linktree/Malevolent Autopsy. Let's hear from one more Malevolent fan before we finish this week.
Yamikaku here, any and all pronouns. And the question I am answering is, name and describe something you're proud of creating because of Malevolent. And as silly as it sounds, but if you know me, it's Arthur's Inventory. I love that little list. I have a beautiful spreadsheet, color-coded, which I've gotten compliments on, in my Google Sheets, because I just love making lists and I love tracking that. And I love updating the wiki and adding and deleting things from it. And I love that that's kind of what I'm known for. You know, people at me on the Discord to, make sure they're right about it, or it's, ask Yami, they have the list. It's just something I'm very proud of. And God bless Harlan for cleaning it out every once in a while and doing it on audio so I can make all my notes. That's what I'm exceptionally proud of making in this fandom. Thanks.
I'm your host, Queen, and I'll see you next week. The horrors persist, but so do we.